That's it for me. Hello everyone. My name is Kim Nielsen, known as Nico Hodai online. I work together with Jay Zek with security. And today I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we can analyze the huge amount of data that is in the blockchain and see if we can dig anything useful out of it, us mere mortals, as it were. So, blockchain analysis. A couple of questions spring up. First and foremost being, blockchain is terribly huge. How do we handle that amount of data? It's gigabytes and gigabytes and gigabytes by now. Yeah, a couple of online block explorers and databases that try to make sense of it. But they're few and have limited capabilities, and it's kind of hard to build on top of those. So the question is if we can kind of make that a bit more practical, maybe have something we can run on our own machines. And then, of course, the bigger question is there anything interesting we can find out at all? Is there any use in all of this that we can actually learn something from the past by observing the blockchain? So, yeah, starting with the first couple of points, like blockchain is huge, but I mean, how hard can it really be? It's well, as we speak, it's just past the 25 gigabytes border, so we've got 25 gigabytes of data to plow through. That's a lot of data, but that's not too hard. I mean, we can fit that into, if we have a powerful workstation, we can fit that in. In terms of how much information is in the blockchain, well, we've passed around 330,000 blocks now. We have about 50 million transactions. We have about 140 million outputs in total containing those transactions. And those are referring to something like 50 million addresses. So finding something in that, well, how hard can it be? Pretty hard. So we kind of need to condense that into something more useful, because looking at it as is kind of hard. So let's have a look at something most of us, I think, knows. How is the data arranged on the blockchain? By the way, I have no idea what each of your technical levels is, so to make up for that, I'm doing my presentation in a wild mix of really advanced stuff and really basic stuff. So going through how the blockchain looks, well, we've got sequences of blocks in a chain, and each block contains transactions, one or more transactions. Each transaction contains one or more inputs, and contains one or more outputs, and of course, each input is referring to exactly one output. So there's kind of a reverse relationship there as well. Each output might have also a corresponding input where it's spent. So that's kind of what the database has to hold if we're going to try to build a queryable database out of this. In addition, each output, that didn't fit on the slide, in addition, each output might also be associated with one wallet address that we know about. If it's a standard transaction where we can decode the script. So on the blockchain, we have all these kind of entities, and they're all referring to each other. And the way they refer to each other is by their hash. For the blocks, we have a SHA-256. It's 32 bytes. Not too big, but big if you have thousands, millions of these things. Same for a transaction. An output we refer to as the transaction hash and then an index, so that's 36 bytes in total. And wallets are not directly referred to, but they have a 20 byte hash that's always encoded in the scripts instead. So, okay, hash is good, but it actually makes it kind of hard to refer to these things, to look it up, because you can only look it up via hash table, and you need to store the hash table somewhere. And that needs lots more space as well. So let's try and rearrange the data a bit by observing that on the blockchain, everything also has a well-defined order. Everything comes in order. I mean, the blocks are obviously ordered. Inside each block we have a number of transactions, but they're also ordered. Inside each transaction we have outputs, and they're as well also ordered inside. And you can also come up with an ordering for every wallet by looking at when is the first time we see this wallet being used on the blockchain. So by observing all of this, we can start simply ordering them by going through each type of data one by one. And that's block number 1, next is block number 2. Do the same for the transactions, just keep going straight through in order, and the same for each output, etc., etc. And now, instead of having to refer to something by hash, we in our database can just refer to it by its number, which is much shorter. So by doing this, we can start storing things in a little bit more compact way. We can put all the blocks, all the information necessary to contain one block, that's just the metadata for the block. Just toss those together in one big array, and do the same for transactions, store those in one big array, and then have the block just point to where in the array is your first transaction. And the next block points to where its first transaction is. So if you want to know from this simple data layout, if you want to, let's see if I can my mouse can nope. Okay, so if you want to find out how many transactions are in block 0, we just check, well, where does block 1 start storing its transactions, and then we can simply see that, well, these 3 must belong to block 0. So that's quite a compact way of storing information. We can do the same for the output. Each transaction points to the first output and input it has, and the next transaction points to its first, and we can get the same sort of information out of that. In addition, the blockchain, as we said, the blockchain doesn't immediately refer to wallets as such. It's just a standard way of using the scripts. But in our database, we're very much interested in the wallets, so we want to cover those. So we store all the wallets that can be used. And then we want to sort of save the information that each output might refer to a wallet or not. So that's kind of interesting. We can look up which wallet each output is paying into. It would be kind of nice if we can look up the reverse too, so we can look up what are all the outputs that any given wallet has used. So we want to reverse it. So we make a similar array of all the references to all the outputs that any given wallet is used in. That will point back, well, store like in a similar way, and then point back to whatever output used that wallet. So we have this sort of circular reference that makes it quick to look up in either direction. So by doing this, I'm just pointing using indexes into arrays instead of hashes, we can start saving a lot of space. So for the blocks, for example, we have 330,000 blocks. Well, that takes about 19 bits to identify any given block using an integer, and the same for the other kinds. So to refer to an output, previously we needed 36 bytes, that is 288 bits. But if you do it with just an index, you only need 28 bits, so you reduced it by 90%, which is kind of nice. So looking at how much smaller we can make this compact database, well, the blocks are so few, there's so little data associated with a single block that is nothing at all. The outputs, well, the original blockchain is about 5 gigabytes worth of outputs. That is the scripts and the values and what it needs to store it. In our reduced index, we can store it with a lot less. Transactions, well, not really that big either, for the same reason as the blocks are not big. The big space waster in the blockchain is all the inputs, because of course in the blockchain you have to encode the cryptographic chain of ownership as well. We don't really need that for our database. We can just verify it on the blockchain and then we store just the relationship in our database, which allows us to save, of course, we can throw away almost everything because most that's on the blockchain is signatures and public keys. We can toss away all of that for our index. And instead we can store our wallet index for fast lookup, and we can put can put back hashes, so we can look up a hash. If we have a block hash and we want to look it up in our database, well, we need to look that up. So we still need to store the hashes and have a lookup table for that. But even so, our compressed index is vastly smaller than the original blockchain. And if it's, say, something like 7 gigabytes, suddenly that's something you can easily toss into memory at most workstations. And you have plenty of memory left to do your actual analysis. So, by being a bit clever about how we arrange the data, we get pretty good access speeds in this simple kind of data layout. Looking up from hashes, fairly fast. Hash table is usually constant time. Looking up, if you have a transaction and you want to find out which block it is, well, we don't actually store that information, but you can look it up with a simple binary search on the block array instead. So that's a binary search. And most of the other stuff is just constant time and pretty fast to look up. So as a result, if you run an analysis straight on the blockchain data, it has massive drawbacks. Usually you have to do a linear sweep. So you can only observe the data you're passing by. You have to scan through all the gigabytes of data, and even a simple analysis can easily take minutes or even hours. But if you have something like this and you can load it into memory, then great. You can run it in seconds or a minute or something. So, yeah, some observations about being kind of clever with the data. By storing it as arrays and indexes into arrays, all the data is constant, and it doesn't matter where in memory it's located. Normally, when you program, you use pointers, but pointers are more sensitive. You can't just shift a pointer because then it's invalid, but an index you can shift. So this means you can memory map this. You just have a massive file on your hard drive, map it into memory, and then as a result, it doesn't actually have to be read. You can leave it up to the operating system to actually read the data later as needed. So it takes no time at all to start your analysis, because it will be loaded later, and it will only load the information you actually need to read. I'm sorry. So it's kind of easy to achieve, since it's just indexes and integers, it's quite easy to achieve data alignment, and you can, with the arrays being separate, you have pretty good data locality straight out of the box, which also helps reduce the actual memory needs. On a normal analysis run with this kind of database, it usually only needs to load like a few gigabytes at most into memory. So, that's enough about the indexing. Now, what kind of simple analysis can I use as a demonstration a little bit for this kind of simple talk? Well, I figure we can do a basic analysis called wallet ownership clustering, which is, well, Bitcoin is based on addresses. Addresses sit in your wallet, and we've all been told that you're never supposed to reuse addresses because that's bad, okay? But everyone has. And this is especially true in the past, where people were less careful. This makes it surprisingly easy to start figuring out if a single person owns multiple wallet addresses, and start reconstructing which addresses make up their complete wallet. And then you can, of course, follow all their transactions and see what they've been up to. So this is based on the simple observation that if you have a transaction with multiple inputs, then you can, of course, assume that it's the same person that controls keys to all the inputs, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to issue this transaction, because the transaction is based on all the private keys. So we can figure out that it's the same person that owns all these addresses. Right, that's basic step number one. Step number two, if you have two transactions, and you see the same address being used as input in both of them, then you can be fairly sure, that now it's the same person that issued both transactions. So it's the same person owns all the addresses for both of those transactions. So you've clustered the ownership information. And if you just run through the blockchain and you do this on all transactions ever issued, you will start getting massive groups of wallets that you sort of have this connection that they're probably owned by the same person. The one caveat for this is that, well, if someone has stolen a key, then this messes up the analysis quite badly. Because they've stolen one key, but they don't necessarily have all of them. And then they can go start spending it somewhere else. That doesn't imply that the same person owns all the wallets, but it's kind of a good starting point. So, with our fancy new super fast database, well, let's run this sweep on the whole blockchain. And since it's so fast, it only takes a few seconds. And this is surprisingly, this is actually more or less real time for this analysis. It takes under a minute to do it. And the result comes up as, well, here are the top 10 wallet owners on the blockchain, historically. And, well, there are a few, obviously huge ones, that have millions of addresses combined together, and then a whole bunch of them that has hundreds of thousands of them, with an equally massive number of outputs, obviously.
Any guess who the number one wallet owner is?
Actually, that's hard to. The number one is hard to identify, actually. But we can see that the top 10 amount for about 10% of all wallets ever seen on the blockchain.
I've identified Bitstamp as well.
Bitstamp?
Yeah, because they do huge transactions from time to time, so it should be.
Yeah, that might well be possible to nail number one on Bitstamp, for example, because they've been active quite a bit in the past. Speaking of the past, we can actually sort of figure that out by graphing how much Bitcoin these owners have held over time. And, well, number one, this shows us that the previous number one holder doesn't actually pop up here as having any massive number of Bitcoins. Rather, he held a lot of outputs and seemed to move coins around a lot. But what we can see in this graph is that, well, we have this kind of suspicious pattern towards the end here that kind of started getting really active in the middle of 2011. And then this blue group, the yellow one is interesting too, but the blue one sort of seems to sit at around 200,000 Bitcoins, which then suddenly get moved somewhere else in early March 2014. So, well, I don't know who that could be. I'll let you guys decide. But the answer is Mt. Gox. Which is not here anymore.
Let's go by it.
Yes, probably. So this is very basic analysis. You can do some more advanced stuff on it too. You can then start analyzing like how does Bitcoin flow between the big holders. It would be kind of interesting to see. You can start applying some heuristics to figure out and guess which is a change wallet, which if you can guess what the change wallet is, you can be reasonably sure that it's the same person who owns the change wallet. You can do even more advanced stuff, but you can watch the Bitcoin network as transactions are issued to try to see if multiple transactions issued kind of at the same time by the same IP, you can guess that it's the same person. There was a recent white paper released on this subject. So yeah, you can do basic analyses like this. You can step it up and do a bit more advanced stuff. Anything we can learn from this? Well, thankfully, it's not that many mega wallets around, whereas all the big ones will be fast. This, of course, is partially because one Bitcoin is worth more now, so you don't have to hold as many coins to have a huge wallet. But it seems like practices have improved, and clients and services are getting better at not reusing addresses too much. Because the main thing that makes this analysis work is if you're reusing the same address. If you're spending coins from your change wallet together with your entry point address, for example. So there's still a little bit more that can be done for the privacy minded. As I said, what makes the analysis work is if you mix coins a lot. So a client can help you avoid that by separating like funds held in different inputs and realizing that if I issue this transaction, it will be sort of a breach in privacy for the wallet owner. Another simple thing that can be done is that, of course, mixing makes it really hard to follow the coins. But even if you just mix it yourself, as in just send your own coins through a couple of new addresses and then hold them there instead, that also makes it hard to do this kind of simple analysis because you then have to identify the next step. Because those new coins then will never have been spent together with your old identifying wallets. So yeah, still a couple of things you can do to make my job harder. But I figured that I wouldn't take it any further today, and I'd just call an end to that. And does anyone have any questions?
What's the motivation to analyze blockchains for you or other company or?
Well, motivation is, well, it can be just curiosity. In this case, it can be interesting to see that, if you're trying to do a forensics analysis and you want to track money from a suspicious individual, well, you're interested in knowing all the wallets he has. So that's one simple analysis that's kind of motivated. In this case, the analysis kind of shows, identifies hundreds of thousands of wallets belonging to Mongox, for example. That's kind of interesting for an outside investigator, for example. So, it's not necessarily a goal of mine, because the goal is obviously to make it hard to do these kinds of analysis. But for things that happened in the past, there's still quite a lot of information that can be dug up from a time where people were less careful. And also that helps make people more careful in the future.
Is it possible to predict Bitcoin price or something?
No, not really. This just tells you kind of what people have been up to, and you can identify, hopefully, like who has been paying what and something like that. But it doesn't give you any advantage like that.
The table you had of the owner of 2 million addresses and 1 million. Do you know? Yeah, this one. Yeah. So have you identified what they are, or is it just the cost? Is that just how it's costed?
Number 2 and a few ones further down are Mongox.
Okay.
Number 1 I haven't actually identified yet. I haven't looked at it too much.
Right. Well, I would assume it must be some automated kind of dice game.
Yeah, that's a good guess. Some of the other ones are older exchanges, are good guesses, where they're again less careful about mixing inputs.
I guess that's one thing you might be able to figure out as well, is like what transactions have come from automated services and what is actually human.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Maybe time intervals like this.
Right, more accurate statistics.
Yeah. Which would be very valuable in terms of it's almost impossible to put a figure on how many Bitcoin users there are out there, for example.
Right. So it's hard to
this kind of thing
estimate.
would be really interesting.
Hard to estimate transaction volume even. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, good point.
I think one really interesting thing about this table is just how many bitcoins the number 2 wallet owner received. 58 million bitcoins. Obviously, that's much more than all the bitcoins that can ever possibly exist. So it shows.
The churn.
Yeah, it shows like how basically they were.
They were sending a lot of coins. That's what you can tell from it.
So that last column is number of
this total value of all outputs that have ever been made.
Right.
So that that includes all the change wallets too. So
Right, yeah.
it's just the total flow of all bitcoins ever.
I see.
So it's not an accurate
Sure, yeah.
measure of holdings or anything.
Sorry, if I'm wrong, but you don't really need a wallet to actually make the transaction. If my understanding is right. So I see a lot of actually in and even an output. So I sort of like, let's say for the like big stamp, typically actually show the in and end transaction. So most of the wallets can't do that.
Sorry, you know what?
Most of the actually public wallets can't actually make the in and end transactions. So I don't know why you're actually mentioning link the transaction to the wallet. So my understanding is you don't really need a wallet to make a transaction. So
I'm sorry, I'm not quite understanding the question.
So you're saying that you think
you associate the transaction to the wallets.
No, an output is associated with the wallet.
When you say wallet, are you talking about keypads or are you talking about...
I think
Yeah,
that's
so
In
address.
this case, I'm
Yeah.
just talking about an address actually, so I'm a
Address,
bit careless about my terminology, I'm sorry.
so? I guess
It's
maybe
one
the
address.
confusion comes from a wallet being defined as one Bitcoin address versus a wallet being defined as thousands of addresses owned by the same person.
Okay, so wallet is address in this case.
I should have been clear. A lot of when I say wallets, in a lot of the cases, I do mean addresses.
Okay.
A single address in the wallet.
That's right.
I'm sorry. Miles?
I guess you are talking with Kobayashi, and please keep secret as a secret. But if I'd like to, if I can know something, update around lost 850,000 and found 200,000, it's very helpful.
I really wish I could, but honestly, I have not been able to speak to Kobayashi a word.
In the future, to talk a lot with Kobayashi.
We have definite hopes of becoming more involved, yes.
So, as you said, now we know that it was possible, but now we can mix the address, or you can make I guess create new address or make fake transaction to hide you. It's totally possible now.
Yeah, I mean, it's not perfect, but it's sort of like the next step.
So do you have any idea of improvements for the future to make?
The next step after that,
Yeah.
in terms of analysis or
Yes.
hiding from analysis?
No, for both. But for analysis first, and
Well, bring that one. Right. Well, as I said, if we follow some of these tricks, it makes it harder to do analysis. If you sort of make it a habit of moving your own coins through new addresses every now and then, makes it harder. You can still, the next step for the analysis would then be to follow, didn't have it here. But you can, again, the analysis can sort of trace which identified owner is sending to one other group of addresses. So if you identify that this holder seems to be very temporary and just sends all his bitcoins to this holder, then again you can guess that it's the same person. But each time you guess, of course, it's a weaker chain of evidence. So this is a good step in that it makes it less obvious. This prevents at least hard proof. And every time you move your coins, you make the evidence a little bit more clear cut. If you can mix your coins with other people, then of course you make it a lot less, even less easy to prove that you own them. But careful use of addresses in your wallet, and this is probably what clients and services have to do for you, is to try to be more careful about which addresses you spend together, because it does reveal information about you. If you move a lot of coins, well, if you don't move a lot of coins actually, if you just keep your coins in the addresses you receive them in, it can be very hard to spend them in a way that's safe, because they might not be available for spending, or they become locked up in a current transaction. So maybe we'll start seeing clients and wallets that make it a habit of moving your coins and distributing them to be more easily spendable in anonymous ways, kind of like how big exchanges and mixing services do it.
Yeah, and I think that's what Jonathan's presentation next month is going to be really interesting follow-up to. Jonathan's going to be presenting about his coin mixing.
Yeah. So I've done a lot of work on mixing and sort of making this kind of analysis more difficult.
Yeah. So we are natural enemies, as it were.
Yeah, exactly. I do have a question, kind of a non-technical question, if I may. So, so the output from your technical analysis, your transaction graph analysis, will be that with a certain degree of confidence, this address still belongs to the some original address.
Right.
Some certain amount of coins still are in possession of some target. My question is, I guess based on the people you've been speaking with, to what degree do people who are interested in this, to what degree can they really rely on that information? Like, for example, law enforcement, if they know that they have 30% confidence that this address belongs to someone, to what degree can they actually act on that information?
Well, due to the nature of this particular analysis, which clusters ownership, if you have two addresses that are both used in the same transaction, that is hard proof, I would say, that it's the same person. But if it's just one...
Yeah, that's my question. Yeah, how so? Like, why would a law enforcement agent interpret that as hard proof that belongs to the same person?
Well, if someone issues this transaction... Oops. I'm going to hold this slide because I think it crashed. We will be back momentarily.
So this is more a question about how do people, like non-technical people, interpret this information, and what do they believe that they gain from this transaction analysis?
Well, for the... Let's see if I'm back.
I guess there hasn't really been any big court case to prove blockchain analysis standing in court yet.
Right.
And
I think Mt. Gox would be probably the first real
the precedent.
Yeah, so in the basic case, that is just a single transaction that spends multiple inputs. Sort of, that is cryptographic evidence that you held the private keys to sign all those inputs.
To receive, to spin the output into your transaction, yes.
Right, so if you have multiple addresses, you would have to have held the keys to all of them. If you have multiple inputs to your transaction.
Okay.
He can add some inputs and I can add some inputs and we put that in the same transaction.
Right.
We can do that. And we may want to do that. We may want to do that if I want to make sure that he actually funds this transaction, and we're both funding for something, then we might want to do it that way. I mean, in terms of probability, I'm sure the vast majority of...
You can do it that way, but I don't think we've ever seen any examples of it. And if that's going to happen from now on, that will probably happen with a multi-sig transaction instead.
Right.
I mean, you can't exclude the possibility, of course, that multiple people sort of individually signed each input and you combine them into the transaction, but it's probably quite rare for that to have happened historically. It might happen now that you've given everyone the idea. But
I think it also kind of, as we're going to be seeing, it still proves that you're friends with each other, or that you're doing business with each other.
Or there's some association. Or that you're doing some conjoined thing with some shared service.
True.
You may not know each other, but you've both got something in common with some kind of
True.
association.
yeah. So in the extreme cases, it's not strictly speaking ownership necessarily, but it's definitely some sort of association.
Right.
And in practice, it is ownership, because in practice, almost all this is bound to be.
Well, in practice, people don't give away their bitcoins.
Yeah, that too. And we're probably not going to see any certain search of that kind of transaction either, because now we have, as I said, now we have multisig to do it in a much better way. For the other kind of, the actual clustering bit of this is a lot less certain, granted, because as I mentioned, all it takes is for one of your keys or some of your keys to be compromised, and then some person can spend that who is not you, and suddenly you incorrectly associate both the entire groups as being somehow associated. So that's the risk of the stimulus. You might want to. It depends on what you're looking for. If you're just looking for ownership, which I guess is kind of rare, it's mostly for statistics maybe, then maybe you make an exception for that, or you try to identify known cases. If you're specifically looking for stolen keys and uses for that, maybe you will run a different kind of analysis to find exactly this sort of suspicious thing, like two groups that only have a single address in common, for example.
Is there a danger that, a danger to you, that is, that as Bitcoin mixing services become more popular, or things like dark wallet, if it ever gets out of that alpha, become popular, that blockchain analysis is going to be rendered kind of useless?
Well, I kind of hope that blockchain analysis becomes useless,
Right.
because everything I can find from the blockchain means that someone used their wallets carelessly, as it were.
Yeah.
Mixing services help, because it means like an extra step where you become like one step or two steps removed from your own funds, as it were, in this kind of analysis. The mixing service itself would probably be identified as a huge wallet owner, but it would be a different owner. It wouldn't be mixing or interfering. But the very fact that you could find the mixing service might mean that you might then start doing another kind of analysis on that. And we've seen some attacks on mixing services where you can sort of reconstruct inputs and outputs for individual people there too. So I guess it can open you up to, if you identify the target, you can target it, as it were.
Yeah, I guess that also a non-tech user may not even know about mixing services or even understand what they do, and just
Very likely.
use an open address.
Yeah, indeed, addressing a lot of these private issues, I think, falls a lot heavier on the client and the or services to be careful about these things, or at least offer options to the user about it.
Actually, I'm running an exchange named the Bitflyer.
Yeah.
We're actually providing some sort of analysis service in the future, the very close future. So I don't know if you want to actually mix up your address, but this is just for fun that we have some sort of actually the data set inside, but I don't know how I cook it. So so what I'm just for fun, I'm trying to actually do some chasing the address by n step. N should be very small, but